Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. And as I was scouring the internet to make sure there wasn't any breaking news related to World of Warcraft and the gaming world to bring to you, I stumbled around a player survey where PvP players were surveyed on their experience with PvP. What content do they do? What has their experience been so far? And some of their ideas on what they would like as far as changes to the game to make it a better experience for themselves. And I found it very interesting, and I wanted to share some of those results with you and my thoughts on those results as well. And if you want to make sure that you're staying up to date with news and topics related to World of Warcraft, then make sure to smash the subscribe button. Your support is greatly appreciated. Now, the first question was, are you mostly content with WoW PvP? And I think surprisingly, 53.7% actually are content with WoW PvP, with only 46.3% saying that they are not content. And I think this does depend on what type of player you are. If you're a player that's mostly focused on gameplay, you just like playing the game, you're not so concerned with the rewards or what rating you are, you just enjoy gameplay, that it's actually a pretty good experience, aside from long queue times. I think it's probably what is, driving the no part of this, contributing a huge portion of the no part is long queue times, because the actual gameplay itself, once you get into a match, I think is actually very entertaining. There's lots of viable specs, more than probably in any other patch's history for the game at the moment. So so you can see that the game is really not that far away from actually being really good. It's like some very small things that need to be adjusted. And I think that this graph would skew a lot more in the direction of mostly content. Now, the second question is, do you feel like the devs communicate enough regarding PvP? And a staggering 95.9% of players say no, with the remaining 4.1% saying yes. Now, obviously, we don't have a Ghost Crawler, we don't have a Halinka, and I think there's probably a good reason for that, given the amount of grief and harassment and threats that Halinka got throughout his career as trying to be the PvP guy voice for the community. I don't think there's anybody brazen or bold enough to want to step into that position to be personally targeted or harassed, which is totally understandable. But at the same time, I do think, kind of a faceless account, something like the Warcraft devs Twitter, something where no one can be single-handedly targeted out for grief or harassment, is definitely a means of communication that is vital. It's really important. It's 100% necessary. And as far as communication, this is things like Circe's Circlet, which is a ring that was randomly now really powerful in PvP because it got giga buffs before it came out. And then they ended up nerfing it for PvP, so PvPers didn't feel like they needed to get it. It wasn't imbalancing the game at all, which was a really good adaptation on their part, but it wasn't communicated whatsoever. You just logged in and you were like, hey, this ring is actually good in PvP. And then you logged in the next week and you're like, wait, this ring's not good in PvP. And it was like, this was something that could have gotten like points of the community to be like, hey, we're aware that the ring ended up being too powerful in PvP. We're dialing it back on the next reset. Maybe they didn't want to draw attention to it. So everybody farmed it for that 1 week and tried to abuse it. Maybe that's part of the reason they didn't communicate something like that. But to me, that's like an instance where some sort of blanket anonymous communication would have won points with the community. And then talking, on rewards and things like that, we see Mythic Plus, for example, getting another mount, another big reward, which I'm glad they're getting that. It's going to stimulate the gameplay. It's going to get more players playing it. But then we're kind of absent on what's going on potentially for rewards moving into the future, which is another question on this survey that I'm going to save for when we actually get to it. But I do think communication from an anonymous section definitely could be stepped up, and I think it would help a lot with player sentiment, which tends to be the main grievance of the game, no matter what part of the game is that players just want to be known that like the problems they're having are being heard, as opposed to just sitting in the dark and feeling nothing's going to change and then giving up hope. I think that's likely leading to a loss of player retention and something that could definitely be improved. What is the most important to you in WoW PvP? 26.3% of players say rewards, so the elite sets, the mounts, etc. So 26.3% of the players playing to get to those certain rating thresholds to try their goal oriented players. 42% are just being able to press play with a fast queue. Just being able to play the game is 42.1%. So that is easily the most important thing right now, which is obviously the reason your queues are long is because people don't want to play healer. The reason it's hard to get a group for dungeons is because no one wants to play healer, no one wants to play tank. These roles need to have more impact in the content that they're in They need to feel like they have more sway and swing in the outcome of situations, so that players feel like, oh, I'm in control of the game if I play this role, as opposed to I'm at the mercy of whatever my allies are doing in combat. So the impact that healers have, how fun they are, is obviously another one, but that's a little bit subjective. But something like Discipline Priest has really high participation margins. Everyone has a lot of fun for the most part playing Discipline Priest. So bringing up some of the fun levels on other healers like Resto Shaman, making them able to contribute damage a bit easier, maybe take some of their damage off the global cooldown so you actually have some more time to actually get to the damage abilities, to feel you're contributing to the outcome of the game. In that regard, just focusing on healer impact and trying to make healers more fun when you're playing them is going to lower queue times. That should be the main focus for that. The next one is being able to push a title or rank. That's pretty much the same as rewards. So I kind of would want to lump those ones together. It's basically almost 50% of the game. So this is probably more oriented around MMR though. So it being stifled or it being too easy flowing. And I've made lots of comments on it so far, but MMR has just been so inconsistent because it's decided by the player base. So if a patch has less players than a previous season, it's just randomly harder to get rewards. If one patch has way more players, it's just easier to get the same rewards. And it's just like, that makes no sense as far as consistency. If you're a player who plays season after season, it's just like, well, I easily got Gladiator and Shadowlands season 1 because there's way more people playing, and then now I'm playing in season 3 and it's impossible to get it. And it's just this inconsistency. It's going to cause people to leave. For someone like me who's just playing for the gameplay, it's not going to cause me to leave. And someone who understands that, like, hey, the MMR will inflate as time goes on. But for somebody who doesn't understand that, which is the majority of the casual audience, the not 1%, it matters a lot. So I think they need to completely scrap the current ranking system and implement something else that is new, that players don't have any expectations behind, so that way they're not feeling like they're not able to hit the goals that they were able to previously, because obviously it's a big issue. And then surprisingly, gear progression, I don't know if this is like a glitch on the graphic or not, but it's very small. And I think that might be because the survey was taken from players who are more competitive. I think like casual players do like gearing up the character, logging on and equipping a new piece of gear. And with the way that they have it currently designed, you gear up your character for the first couple of months, and then they unlock everything, and everyone can play their alts. And that's probably because those casual players who play for gearing up only stick around for the first bit of a season and then they're gone. But the players who want to play for gameplay will stay if you unlock everything for them. They don't want to feel like they're locked into one thing with no options to explore. So I think they found like a nice middle ground in that sense, where they can satisfy players who have that gearing up itch, and also satisfy players who want to be playing a lot of alts with the second half of the season. And that's an improvement that they've been making to the season. Often we talk about the things that are wrong, but there are things that have actually improved over time. And I think that that's actually like a fair medium to satisfy both of those audiences. But I was kind of surprised how small it was. Again, I think it's likely just because these players are ultra committed if they took the survey at this point in the season. And they're probably more oriented around the competitive integrity of the game, as opposed to kind of the dopamine circuit that gear progression gives you. What change would you like to see implemented the most? So 27.6% was more healer incentives. Again, the incentive only works so long as that they desire it, right? They added a title, the Battle Mender, but as soon as you get that, it's like, what? There's no other incentive for it. The only other incentive is that you get fast queues. So if you're somebody who's limited on time, you really love WoW PvP, it's the only game you want to play, you kind of get pushed into being a healer because it's the only way you're going to be able to get a queue. It's the only way you're going to be able to get a game. And I think I'm blocking the graphic here, so I'm just going to move myself over so you can see it. So I don't know if it's necessarily, well, obviously more incentives would be nice. But I think making healers more fun and making them have more impact in any of the content in the game would go a long way as well. Percentile rankings. And I think this basically means that they want everything to be the same every season, which makes sense, but it doesn't really follow in line with how WoW is structured, right? So if you think about raiding, it's hard at the beginning, it gets easier as you gear up, and then it gets easier as they nerf the bosses, and then pretty much by the end, everybody is knocking down all the pins and able to kill all the bosses. And I think that's how they're viewing PvP. At the beginning, it's really hard. You don't get raiding really fast. Slowly over time, it gets inflated. Eventually, everybody gets pushed through, and as long as you kept playing the game, you're pretty much going to get the goal that you are going after for that season with the current inflation model. But for players who want to play more competitively and they get stifled at the beginning of the season where they're like 500 rating lower than they were at the end of the last one. That's obviously a jarring and staggering mental gymnastics session that you got to go through in order to just be like, it doesn't really matter, because the percentiles still exist, right? Like for myself, I'm pushing for rank 1 Moonkin, and I could see that I'm like rank 12 on the ladder. And I know that in previous seasons, I was rank 3 through 1. So I'm 10 ranks behind where I normally am in a season. And you can track that, but I think it's only after you're in the top rankings where it starts tracking that number. I think it's above 2,400. So it's a bit harder as just like a casual player who might be 1,800 or something like that. But I also saw on the Reddit post here that a lot of players were scrolling through and really happy about, like, I just hit 1,800 for the first time. I'm really happy. I just hit 1,900 for the first time. The sad reality of that is if inflation didn't exist, they probably wouldn't hit that goal. So the current system does have pros, but it has cons, and I don't know if you can find a happy medium between the two. And also the amount of development time and cost that it would take to change that system is something to also consider, right? With no guarantee that it'll actually be better, because if you remove the inflation aspect of the game, of the system, then players who now are hitting those goals that they wouldn't have otherwise been able to hit might have been frustrated because they can never get to the number they wanted to go to. And you could say whether or not that should just be it. If they weren't good enough to get there, they shouldn't have been able to get there. And it's almost like you're lying to the player. I think there's lots of fair debate to be said there. I think League of Legends does actually have some inflation, but it's on their lower rankings only. So maybe you do add a little bit of inflation to the lower rankings, like 1,400 to 1,600, giving them a little bit of a boost as the season goes on. But then above that, it's not the case. You could maybe find a happy medium like that, because I think you would lose players who just absolutely give up because they can't make any progress at all. And that inflation does push them a little bit to keep trying to get better at the game. So there's pros. I see pros and cons to both of the systems, and it's probably too much risk and too much time, too much money maybe. But again, this is where communication comes in, having active communication of their thoughts on the current systems and where should they take it would definitely go a long way. Only 13.5% say better class balance, which is very small. So I feel like they've done, as far as like class balance, they've done a really good job. Probably one of the best seasons in that regard, even though I'm salty about Boomkin being really weak defensively. I think it's probably the best of like some of the most recent seasons. A lot of players want to plunder like Renown track, so something that's just like ongoing, something to chase. I know Helinka proposed the idea in WoD of having in-game tournaments that you could sign up for every weekend or something like that. And now I wish that they had actually implemented that, because that would add like really nice weekly flavor. Like Saturday comes around and you can play the in-game tournament, and maybe there's a gold entry fee, and then it goes into a pot and you play for the gold at the end of the pot or something like that. I think that's more community oriented stuff like that. That's what made Warcraft 3 so cool back in the day, was the weekly in-game tournaments that it had. Some systems like that, or just a blanket renown system for players to progress through. We kind of have that with the honor level system. It's just that it hasn't been updated through Legion, and if you've been playing since then, you probably have majority of those rewards. But that honor level system is a renown track. It's just a lot of players have completed it, and it hasn't been updated since then, me being one of those that has completed it. 10% of the players want actual solo queue arena, which is you just queue into a ranked 3v3 game, and maybe you queue into actual 3v3 teams, as opposed to the solo shuffle method. Maybe you can duo queue with a healer and it gives you a third or something like that. I definitely think that would help 3v3 participation, which is obviously struggling. So maybe that is something they could consider. But I think you'd be at a huge disadvantage, especially if you're not in voice versus a team playing the most fought-em meta comp, and you get the not fought-em meta comp with no voice. You're probably going to get thrown around. But if it's possible to implement with low cost and it's easy to do, I don't really see why not. Would be the only thing there. And obviously 16.2% of the players, they want a glad mount from Shuffle and Blitz. And I think a recolored mount is... That 100%. It should be in Shovel, it should be in Blitz. There should be a recolored mount. I think that's a huge incentive for those game modes. I think the reason they don't want to implement it is because it's pretty much the only thing keeping 3v3, medium level competitive rating bracket alive. Because if you could get a mount, then the players who maybe were like, hey, I got to really try and get a 3v3 team to try and get the glad mount, they're probably not going to do it. So maybe they're a bit worried about that killing the bracket. Because remember when 5v5 arena and WoD, they took the Gladman out of the bracket. Everyone stopped playing it. No one was playing it. They deleted the bracket. So I'm a bit worried about that. But the thing is 3v3 is much like League of Legends team queue, and no one does rank team queue on League of Legends. They all play solo queue. The only people who play team queue are the tournament teams. And that's just how the game works. So I think having the 3v3 bracket stay in the game is good, because I think that experience is a worthwhile experience. Building a team, pushing throughout a season, some of my best memories and friends came from that experience. But as far as gameplay, I actually prefer Shuffle, because I like getting random comps and having random specs be able to play and have viable options and seeing how they intermingle with each other in order to find victory. So I actually like the gameplay of Shuffle more, but obviously the experience with a team I think is better with 3v3. So it's in an ideal world, then you would have both, right? But I also think it's kind of unfair that these other ranking brackets don't have some type of mount to offer. And then, what game mode do you play the most? 42% of players come in at Shuffle. Only 6.9% at random BGs. So again, I think the people who scroll on this Reddit, who scroll through this and actually did the survey, are pretty hardcore dedicated players. So you're not going to get as much of a casual player in this, because like World PvP is so small I can't even see what the number is. Rated BGs are higher than World PvP, which I'd be surprised if you actually got like, you know, a sample size of the whole player base. Blitz is at a very healthy margin, 20.8%. Threes is honestly pretty healthy. So this tells me this is a really competitive group of people, because this should not be maybe this high, but 17.3% for 3v3 and then 8.1% for 2v2. And to me, having all these game modes, it's always been a ramp into getting into the game. The best way to get into WoW PvP is to start with random BGs, you know, fight some of the classes in the game in a low stress environment, see how it feels to get stunned by some of the classes, what abilities you have to survive them, try and make sure that you're topping damage so that you know how to perform really well. You start in random BGs, you do that for a while until you get bored of it. Then you jump into 2v2 where it's less players, it's less stimulus, less overwhelming. You get in 2v2, you see how your class works in an arena environment, and then you step into Shuffle or 3v3. And to me, that's always been the best way to ladder yourself into competitive PvP, the best experience. If you just jump immediately into the deep end of the pool in 3v3, you're going to get really overwhelmed. It's going to be really hard to make it work. So that's the ramp that I would recommend for it. But obviously Shuffle is, you know, a predominant number of players, and that data is shown on statistic websites like Justfar as well, so it makes sense. Word cloud of 300 open-ended responses. These are just words that I think players gathered based on the internet. So rated, it's too hard, more rewards, solo queue, balance, new systems, better incentives, fun and fix. What game modes do you play the most? This is exactly the same thing as what we just read before. This AI summary: a majority of players feel discouraged by developer neglect and lack of rewards and motivation to play. See, this is the developer neglect thing is strange, because the game balance is actually really good, right? So as far as like that element of it, I don't think it's being neglected at all. We've gotten updates like week after week, lots of changes, lots of class balance tuning. So I really don't think there's neglect there. I don't think it's fair to say that. As far as lack of rewards, again, they redistributed a lot of rewards this season, you know, taking the elite set out to lower brackets. They lowered some rewards as well to try and make it a better incentive for players to continue to push towards the top, but it's still not enough. So like, what amount of rewards is actually enough so that players don't feel like there's a lack of rewards? Maybe they're just speaking solely to no mounts from certain brackets in the game. And motivation to play. Now, motivation to play, your motivation is probably being killed for two factors. One is that this goal you're trying to get to feels so far away, and MMR is pushing you so down that you feel like you're never going to get to it, so you give up. Is probably the biggest problem, which is how it's kind of currently layered. The three top proposed solutions to WoW PvP were adding more rewards, inflating MMR, and adding healer incentives. A smaller group of players called for reducing button bloat, which honestly in 11.1 they're looking at. They are reducing keybinds, I think, on Shaman, mostly Shaman. There are a few other classes I think that are getting keybind reductions, like I think Disc is losing Rapture or something like that. So they're actually doing a lot of the stuff that players are asking for. I think the biggest one that's been ongoing is related to MMR, and it's related to the current ladder structure and just not really any communication around it. That to me seems to be the biggest gripe for players, because they're looking at ability bloat, they're bringing that down, they're listening to the players there. The game balance is good, the gameplay is actually good, but it's just the structure of MMR, the structure of rewards that players seem to be the most dissatisfied with, which, you know, pretty much aligns with what I've observed as well, and how I feel, I think, personally about it, as far as getting players to want to go into it. Another thing to consider also is just, we're into trend meta. As far as games, they're trending when they're new, and then a few months later, after people have figured out the meta, or they get frustrated by something, or the developers do something and ruin the game, or it's just no more dopamine and they get bored and then they leave, and it's the next new trend. And that's something that I don't even know if any amount of changes is actually going to be able to combat. You're going to lose a significant amount of players after some time now, just because that's how it is. That's how it is. This game comes out, next new game comes out, this is going to kill every other game, and then 3 months later, no one's talking about it, and then some other game. So do take that into consideration as well. But I do think there are these things that are definitely actionable that I would also personally like to see improved upon, because there's a lot of stuff that baseline is already really good, that has leveled up a lot from previous expansions. And then to me, this is like the next step that I would like them to take as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you guys enjoyed the discussion. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. What are your biggest gripes with PvP? What should they do going forward? And other than that, I will see you in the next video.